I still remember the smell of fresh paint in the house I bought for Mom, the faint sweetness of something new, the quiet promise that maybe, finally, life was turning around for both of us. I'd spent months planning it all, sketching layouts, comparing tiles, arguing with contractors over little details no one else would ever notice. I wanted it to feel warm, soft, lived in. I wanted her to walk through the door and feel safe. It was supposed to be our fresh start. After Dad passed, things had changed in ways I didn't expect. Grief made Mom smaller somehow, more fragile, more dependent. She stopped cooking, stopped going out with her friends, even stopped singing to herself while cleaning like she used to. The house we'd rented felt too empty, too heavy with his absence. I thought if I gave her something new, a home she could call ours, maybe it would help her heal. I was only 25, still paying off my student loans, but when I landed my first big architectural project and saw the bonus hit my account, I didn't even think twice. I called the real estate agent that same week. I handled the paperwork myself, every inspection, every meeting, every signature. The house went under both our names, though the down payment came entirely from me. Mom had no savings left, and I didn't care. She had given me everything growing up. It was my turn to give back. When I handed her the keys, she cried, real tears that fell onto her hands as she kept whispering, "You're my angel, Felicia. You've always been." I hugged her and told her it was our home now, that we'd fill it with new memories. For a while, it even felt true. We spent the first week painting the kitchen cabinets together. I remember her humming again, her hair tied up messily, a streak of white paint on her cheek. She seemed lighter, like the weight of all those lonely years had lifted. We bought second-hand furniture, stayed up late choosing curtains online, laughed about how we'd need to christen the place with takeout and cheap wine. Those were good days, short-lived but good. Then one Friday evening, I came home from work and saw a car I didn't recognize parked in the driveway. The trunk was open. 2 suitcases sat beside it. Amber. She was standing at the door, talking to Mom, her voice sugary and exaggerated, the one she used when she needed something. Just for a few weeks, she was saying, her hand resting on Mom's shoulder, "You know how hard things have been since Mark left. I just need time to get back on my feet." When I stepped inside, Mom looked at me as though I'd just walked into a conversation that had already been decided. "Felicia," she said gently, "Amber's going to stay with us for a little while. She's had a rough patch." I looked from Mom to Amber. "And where exactly is she going to stay?" Mom's tone shifted, careful but firm. "She can take your room. You don't mind, right? You can move into the guest room for now." I froze. "My room?" I asked. The room where I had unpacked my life, hung my drawings, placed my books on the shelves I'd built myself. The room I paid for. Amber gave me that little half-smile I'd known all my life, the one that meant she'd already won. "Don't worry, sis, it's just temporary. Promise." Something inside me nodded. "You're serious?" I asked Mom. She crossed her arms, a familiar defensive stance. "Amber needs support right now. You're young, Felicia. You'll understand someday when you have kids of your own." That line, "you'll understand someday," always came out when she wanted me silent. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I wanted to say, "I am supporting her. I've been supporting you this whole time." But I didn't. I didn't want to ruin the fragile peace we built. I told myself it was just for a few weeks, that she'd leave soon. That night, while Amber moved her boxes into my room, I lay awake in the guest bed staring at the ceiling fan. I could hear her laughter through the wall, her phone calls, the creak of her bed as she got comfortable in my space. It felt like being erased from my own home. In the morning, my coffee mug was gone, replaced by hers on the counter. My framed photo of Dad had been moved from the hallway table to a box near the stairs. Little things, quiet things that told me this wasn't temporary at all. Mom was beaming again, fluttering around Amber, cooking breakfast like she hadn't in months. "It's nice having both my girls under one roof," she said, placing pancakes on the table. "Feels like a real family again." But it didn't. It felt like the house was slowly slipping out of my hands, one quiet decision at a time. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up inside me, but it lingered in every corner, like the faint smell of paint that hadn't yet faded. And even though I didn't know it then, that smell would be the last reminder of the life I thought I was building, a home meant for love and peace, before it became the battleground where everything I'd worked for would be taken from me. I wish I had trusted my gut that day. The house changed its voice the week Amber moved in, where it had hummed. A soft, private hum of an oven warming and quiet music in the evenings. There came a brassy, intrusive clatter, the clang of suitcases, sharp laughter down the hall, the steady thump of bass through walls that had just learned how to breathe again. Amber spread herself across the rooms the way a spill spreads, no edges, no apology. Her makeup sat in a scatter across my bathroom counter like a second skin. Her shoes lined the stairs as if she'd been there a lifetime. Her laundry formed slow, unending islands in the hallway. Every night at 2 the house woke to music so loud the windows vibrated a little. Those windows had watched me paint the kitchen with my hands and keep vigil after long nights at the office. Now they rattled as Amber danced and called her friends over. Mom's reaction surprised me more than Amber's arrival. Instead of the quiet concern I'd expected, the whispered question, the plan to talk, there was an almost immediate shielding. "She's going through a lot," she said, like a spell to end the conversation. Her eyes softened when she looked at Amber. She smoothed a hand over the air between them the way one might smooth a dress. I recognized the pattern: protect the wounded child at all costs. Mom had raised both of us, and in her mind, the older one's wounds were deeper, more deserving. Amber could make the world collapse and Mom would build a bed of pillows out of the rubble. That instinct, maternal, complicated, clothed with guilt, explained a lot but didn't excuse the quiet violence of what followed. I kept paying. I paid because I had promised myself this place would mean security for Mom and a future for both of us. My name on the mortgage, the automatic withdrawal that showed up every month, those were the scaffolding I'd put up so we wouldn't fall. I paid the utilities, I filled the pantry. I bought toilet paper when it felt like the only adult thing left to do. Amber used my grocery list as if it were a map to someone else's generosity. Mom, who once balanced household ledgers by heart, apparently no longer noticed whose name was associated with which bill. She busied herself with making pancakes and nostalgia, with reclaiming a family image in her mind while the financial details slid quietly into my shoulders. I tried to set boundaries the way you patch a small tear before it becomes a rent, politely, directly, with a calm tone. "Amber, can we talk about contributing to groceries?" I'd asked one evening, notebooks open on the kitchen island, sketch lines still smudged on my fingers from a day at the studio. Amber's laugh was the response. "I'm getting back on my feet," she said. "Just give me time. I'll get you, Felicia." Watching her mouth form the words was like watching someone press a bandage over an open wound and call that help. She promised to pay back money she'd taken, borrowed, in her terms, but the ledger of borrowed things grew longer. Dinner tabs, concert tickets I never saw reimbursed, a short-term loan on my credit card for a car repair that ended with a shrug and a story about bad mechanics. Each deflection sharpened me. Each excuse piled beside the unpaid invoices. I began to catalog, not out of vengeance but because facts mattered. Dates of payments I'd made, names of the utility accounts, the balance on the credit card I'd closed out for the down payment. When I raised those facts, Mom's face folded into an expression I knew too well, like someone trying to place blame on an invisible temperature. "Amber has been through a lot, Felicia," she said softly, and the softness cut deeper than any anger. It was a softness that meant, I will side with the one who looks most in need. It meant, I cannot bear to see her fail. The dynamic shifted from unfairness into something colder, moral judgment. My insistence on fairness labeled me the villain. "You don't understand sacrifice," Mom told me once, as if my years of overtime and scrimped lunches were invisible. Amber watched my attempts to manage the household like a spectator at a play where she'd already stolen the props. She developed a new pastime, making me feel small in public. At dinner with her friends, she introduced me as my sister who just works a lot. The ellipsis was a knife. The breaking point didn't come with a single thunderclap. It was a slow, relentless accumulation of slights. My towels disappearing into Amber's heap. My favorite mug turned into her overnight cup. My drawings moved from a wall to a cardboard box in the closet. It was the look Mom gave when Amber flung a dress over a chair, and Amber's laugh that filled the room and made me silent. It was the night I found cigarette butts in the flower bed and realized Amber's guests had been smoking on the porch where I had planned to have coffee with Mom on Sunday mornings. We argued, but not with the clarity I needed. My words, direct, factual, met Mom's weary defenses and Amber's practiced victimhood. "You're so dramatic," Amber said once, folding her arms like a judge awaiting a verdict. "You always take things so seriously." Mom chimed in with that pained tenderness. "We're trying to help her. Why are you making this about money? As if paying a mortgage and feeding a household weren't the most basic way to help. The actual ultimatum felt unbelievable at first, an absurd punchline to a bad joke. Mom, who had once turned to me when the car broke down and I handed over my last dollars for a towel, looked at me with a kind of exhausted righteousness and said, blunt and small, "Maybe you should find your own place for a while." When I laughed, it was sharp, because laughter was easier than starting the argument I already knew I would lose. But she didn't smile, her arms folded, her stance hardened into a boundary she had chosen to erect. "You can take the guest room or move out," she said, as if offering me a menu. Amber's smirk was the last thing that pushed me off the edge, the way she tilted her head, easy, triumphant, said she already had the script memorized. "You don't mind, right?" she asked, as if the right answer had been decided long before I walked through the door. Her voice carried an entitlement that had always been her armor, the belief that she was owed space because she had been given it before. The crack that opened inside me was not cinematic. It was a slow splintering that finally splintered. I packed methodically. Not because I was dramatic, but because I wanted to leave nothing to ambiguity. I folded clothes, placed my sketchbooks in a tote, wrapped my father's photograph in tissue, and tucked it into my bag last, the way you hide a secret that you cannot yet let go of. I placed my key on the kitchen table, my key, polished from turned locks and late-night returns, put on my jacket, and walked out the front door as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. They did not call after me. Amber did not rush to stop me. Mom watched from the doorway, pancake spatula still in her hand, like a portrait of someone who had decided something and could not undo it. The car door shut with a solid click. The house settled into a new silence behind me, one that felt like a held breath. As I walked away, I thought of all the tiny, careful investments I'd made into that home, the time, the money, the trust, and realized that what I had built for love had been measured and found insufficient. I felt hollow and strangely relieved, like a limb freed of frost. The guest room would be a bedroom now. The rooms would rearrange themselves around Amber's presence. I did not know then whether I had lost or saved anything, only that the choice had been taken from me, and in not fighting for the right kind of war, I had chosen to leave. The days that followed felt like standing in the echo of an explosion, everything silent, but the ringing never stopped. I stayed with my friend Mia, sleeping on her couch, surrounded by the faint scent of her jasmine candle and the constant hum of her old refrigerator. I told her bits and pieces, enough to explain why I suddenly needed a place to stay, but not enough to open the full wound. Some betrayals are too personal to translate into words. You have to sit with them, let them rot a little in silence before you can understand what they've turned you into. I went to work, forced myself into routine. Drafting blueprints, checking elevations, running numbers, precision was my refuge. The rhythm of lines and angles offered control when everything else had slipped out of my hands. But even as I stared at screens filled with perfect symmetry, my thoughts circled back to that house, the one I'd scrubbed, painted, furnished. Every wall I'd chosen a color for now held the sound of my sister's laughter and my mother's willful blindness. I imagined them there, probably sitting in the living room I designed for Mom's comfort, watching TV, eating dinner like nothing had happened. That image pressed against my chest until breathing became an effort. What burned most wasn't anger, it was humiliation, the kind that sinks deep, slow, invisible. I had done everything right, worked hard, saved, built something meant to be a sanctuary, and still somehow, I was the one outside looking in. Every time my phone buzzed with the mortgage payment reminder, it felt like a taunt, like the bank itself was laughing. Still paying for their comfort, huh? The cruel irony was that I was funding my own exile. Late one night, sitting in Mia's kitchen with my laptop open, I decided to check the mortgage documents again. I had done it 100 times before, just to reassure myself the numbers were correct. But that night, something else caught my attention, something I had forgotten in the fog of emotion. The loan wasn't solely in my name. I had added Mom as co-owner to make her feel secure, to give her the dignity of ownership. At the time, it had felt like love. Now, that detail gleamed like a sharp edge I hadn't noticed before. Mom had no income, no steady source of money. She depended on me entirely. That realization didn't come with fireworks. It was quiet, clinical, like a lever clicking into place. For the first time in weeks, I sat back and let the truth settle. The house might have been their stage, but I had been the one keeping the lights on. Without me, the show couldn't go on for long. Revenge crossed my mind. A petty, primal voice whispered all the ways I could make them hurt. Change the locks, reclaim my furniture, report Amber's freeloading to every authority that would listen. But those were fleeting, impulsive fantasies. The more I sat with the idea, the more I understood that I didn't need to do anything destructive. Sometimes power doesn't come from retaliation, it comes from withdrawal. From the deliberate decision to stop feeding what has already consumed too much of you. So I made the call. I remember the hold music from the bank, some generic piano lute that repeated every 20 seconds. My thumb tapped against my knee as I waited, rehearsing the words in my head. When the representative finally answered, her voice was polite, detached. "How can I help you today?" I told her I wanted to remove my automatic payments for the mortgage. I said calmly that I was no longer residing in the property and that the co-owner, my mother, would now be handling payments directly. She paused, probably typing something into her system. Then she asked, "Would you like to provide updated contact information for the co-owner?" I smiled, a thin, private smile she couldn't see. "No," I said. "She's already listed." The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. No drama, no confrontation. Just a quiet administrative action that shifted the entire balance of control. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone, the silence around me thick and unfamiliar. I'd expected guilt or second thoughts. Instead, a strange calm spread through me, steady, grounded, like the first inhale after holding your breath underwater for too long. I didn't text Mom. I didn't warn Amber. For once, I let absence speak for me. In the following days, I went about life as if nothing monumental had happened. I got up, went to work, had lunch with coworkers who didn't know they were sitting beside a woman who had just quietly redrawn the lines of a family's future. The peace wasn't joyous, it was clean, deliberate. The kind of peace that follows a decision so rational it feels almost sacred. Every night, when I returned to Mia's couch, I'd glance at my phone. No messages from Mom. No missed calls from Amber. The silence stretched, unbroken. It wasn't surprising. They were probably too comfortable to notice yet. But I knew what was coming. The due date was approaching, and for the first time, the money wouldn't appear. It was a strange thing, waiting for a storm you created, not out of malice, but out of necessity. I didn't feel vengeful, just resolute. Like someone who'd finally realized that sometimes love isn't about saving people. It's about letting them feel the weight of their own choices. As the night deepened and the city outside hummed faintly through Maya's window, I wrapped myself in a blanket that wasn't mine and felt, for the first time in a long time, free. Not happy. Freedom rarely is, but steady. I had stepped back from the chaos, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was power, reclaimed quietly, one withheld payment at a time. The call came like a siren through a quiet afternoon. Mom's voice raw, thin with panic, breathing like someone running up a flight of stairs. "Felicia, the bank just called, they're saying the mortgage payment is past due." Her words tumbled out around one another as if shouting faster might patch whatever hole was opening beneath them. I felt the room narrow. For a second, I pictured the living room we painted together, the soft gray wall, the crooked line where I'd missed a brushstroke, the vase Dad used to set on the mantel, and then I put that image aside. My voice came out even practiced, a tool I'd learned to use at work when clients wanted to argue costs. "You're on the title, Mom. It's your responsibility too." There was a sharp intake of breath. "You can't just stop paying. What's wrong with you?" she shouted, the words laced with wounded incredulity, as if my act of withdrawal were a personal betrayal rather than the consequence of months of being taken for granted. I had braced for this. The shock had passed. What I hadn't expected was how pure the sound of my own calm would feel in the face of their outrage. Small, cold, immovable. "Maybe Amber can help," I said flatly. She needed support, right? Silence on the line, brief, stunned, then a flurry of voice as if the words I'd offered had scattered something brittle in the room. Amber lunged for the phone like a dog for a dropped steak. Her voice, when it came through, was a hiss. "What kind of person abandons her own mother like this?" she demanded, every syllable sharpened by performative horror. I could hear Mom's muffled attempts to soothe her, the familiar pattern of pleading and placation that had folded the family into its new shape. Amber's fury wasn't pure rage. It was a practiced theatrix intended to frame herself as victim, so she could lead the chorus of blame. "The kind of person who's done being used," I said simply. I heard the intake, then a loud metallic clatter, the thunk of a phone dropped onto a counter, the sharp sound of legs pacing. "You hung up on me, after everything?" Mom asked, voice fraying. "Yes," I answered. "I hung up." The finality of the word surprised me with its own small power. Hanging up felt like closing a door on a long, noisy auction where everyone had been bidding on my patience and not my worth. 3 days later, the perimeter around that house felt different even from across the street. A neighbor, Mrs. Delgado from 2 doors down, whose begonias I'd watered when she'd been in the hospital, texted me a short, stunned account. Amber had thrown a fit in the driveway, banging on the passenger window of their SUV, and shrieking so loud that 3 people came out of their homes to see what was happening. She had shouted that Mom had been abandoned by her own daughter and that I was cruel and heartless. The neighbor's message ended with a small observation. The power had been turned off. There were no lights. The utilities being cut was a detail I had overlooked intentionally. I'd stopped the mortgage autopay, but utilities had remained active only because I'd set them up when we moved in, the convenience of a single account. That convenience had been a one-way street. Seeing their absence sharpened the scene in my mind, the silent hum of the refrigerator gone, the soft evening glow of the lamp snuffed, the small ritual of boiling water for tea interrupted. Practical things, the unremarkable scaffolding of everyday life, had been under my name. They would now be the first to feel the consequence of not having me as their financial backbone. I thought of Mom on the other end of the phone earlier, her voice brittle with that old mix of shame and entitlement, and wondered about what she felt in the quiet after the call. Was it panic? Shame? For a woman unaccustomed to making spreadsheets or balancing ledgers, managing the sudden absence of funds would be a foreign labor. She defended Amber without asking for numbers for evidence. She'd chosen a moral compass that pointed toward comfort for the one who looked most fragile, not toward fairness. That choice had a cost. When I pictured Amber in the driveway, I remembered the theater of her life, the practiced vulnerability, the stories that always found an audience. But this time there was no one to perform to who cared about her history. The bank does not narrate. It only counts. The utility company does not listen to stories. It only logs usage and balance. I had stepped out of the story they were telling themselves, left the stage, and the mechanical systems of reality began to report the true totals. Later that evening I walked, without thinking, to the small park near Maya's apartment. I sat on a bench that smelled faintly of dog walkers and crushed gum, the city lowering its sound around me. I replayed the phone call as if auditioning for the role of my own life. The way I had kept my voice calm, the way I had allowed silence to be the messenger. The calmness hadn't been cruelty, it was a strategy honed from months of depletion. I wasn't angry so much as resolved. Anger is a hot wind. Resolution is an iron that flattens the crease. I thought about what would happen next, about the logistics the bank would trigger, about past due notices and late fees, about the polite, implacable letters the financial institutions send that carry the weight of bureaucracy rather than mercy. I pictured Mom trying to call them, apologizing through tears, and being handed a list of requirements and a firm voice offering payment options. I imagined Amber shouting and then the slow deflation when she realized shouting doesn't pay for electricity. Those images were not satisfying in a gloating sense, they were clarifying. They showed cause and effect in a line as clean as a draft on tracing paper. In the nights after the call, my sleep came in segments, short, efficient, restorative. There was no triumphant joy, only the steady warmth of a decision that matched my values. I had not wanted to hurt them. I had wanted to stop shouldering what wasn't mine alone. Standing up to be counted had less to do with punishment than with boundaries, a necessary sharp line drawn between generosity and exploitation. When Mrs. Delgado's next message arrived, this time a photo of the porch in twilight, the house a dark silhouette against the sky, I felt a small, complex relief. The image was not the sight of victory, it was the sight of consequence finally being visible. I understood then that absence could be a messenger far louder than anger. I had stepped back and let reality speak in the language it understands. Bills unpaid, lights out, the quiet that follows avoiding someone else's responsibility. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I sat with my decision like a patient with a cast, aware of the temporary discomfort, confident in the healing it would enable. The storm, when it came, would not be theatrical. It would be practical, administrative, and merciless in the way only paperwork can be. And in that mercilessness I found a strange, hard comfort. Finally, the balance sheet would be honest. The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a ping that felt almost accidental among the usual clutter of notifications. I had just poured myself a cup of tea, the steam curling up like a signal from some distant, simpler life. My phone vibrated, and there it was, Amber's name flashing in bold. Wait, Felicia paid for all this? I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the cup. The sound echoed in the empty apartment I had rented, a modest place, functional, devoid of any pretense or nostalgia. But in that laughter was a mix of disbelief, vindication, and a long-buried exhaustion finally giving way. I could see it clearly now. The irony that had lain dormant for weeks, buried under indignation, resentment, and the cold hum of overdue bills. Amber, the queen of victimhood, the one who had so effortlessly claimed sympathy and leverage, had only just realized the truth. Everything they had taken for granted, every couch, every microwave, every freshly painted wall, every drawer stocked with groceries, had been funded by my labor, my sacrifices, my first serious windfall as a young professional finally gaining a foothold in the world. I let myself linger on that thought, the sheer audacity of it, the way the world had tilted slightly back into equilibrium. Their comfort, their luxury, their sense of entitlement had been purchased not from inheritance, not from parental support, not even from some clever manipulation, but from me. Me, the younger sister, the angel mom, had praised the day I handed over the house keys, the one who had smiled through tears, who had believed in family, who had trusted love and loyalty. Then came Mom's message, delayed and tentative, soft where Amber had been sharp. Please, we didn't mean to push you out. The house isn't the same without you. Her words were a kind of confession, a quiet plea wrapped in regret. I stared at them, the tiny digital punctuation of guilt almost palpable through the glowing screen. I felt the old tug of empathy, the one that had led me to argue with myself over fairness and patience, the one that had allowed Amber's suitcases to spread through the rooms I had designed, the one that had kept me paying the bills while their comfort grew around me. But it was faint, distant, overpowered by the clarity of my own hard-won boundaries. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The actions had already been taken, deliberate and irrevocable. The papers were signed, the formalities completed, my name removed from the property. That small act of legal detachment carried a weight far beyond the ink and paper. It was the final assertion that I was no longer complicit in their exploitation, no longer the invisible hand keeping their life afloat. I could feel the quiet authority in that absence, a strange and potent kind of justice delivered not with rage but with precision. The weeks that followed were an odd mix of anticipation and inevitability. From my apartment, I followed the news of the house like a spectator at a slow-motion play. Notices arrived, increasingly urgent, a paper trail I could track from my rented space. Missed payments, overdue balances, final warnings. Amber's initial shock had evolved into frantic scrambling. I imagined the conversations, the arguments, the frantic searching for funds that didn't exist in their hands. I imagined Mom, the voice that had once guided my conscience, now stammering through phone calls with creditors, trying to patch holes with apologies, with promises, with excuses. And then, 3 months after my withdrawal, the inevitable arrived. The bank repossessed the house. The letters arrived at the old address first, then forwarded, final and impersonal. I read them with an odd sense of closure, not triumph, not glee, but the rare satisfaction of a balance restored. It was harsh. There was no denying it, but it was fair. The weight of entitlement, of selfishness, of mismanagement, of taking for granted what had been freely given, had finally found its reckoning. I reflected on all of it while walking home one evening, the city bathed in the soft amber glow of streetlights. The house, once a symbol of love and generosity, had become a symbol of misused trust. And now, free from the burden of their expectations, free from the constant strain of sustaining a comfort that wasn't mine to maintain, I felt something rare. An unencumbered, almost sacred lightness. The laughter I had felt when reading Amber's text returned, this time quieter, deeper, the kind that bubbles from understanding one's own worth. I didn't dwell on revenge. I didn't catalog their mistakes in a journal of vindication. I let the facts speak for themselves, the unpaid bills, the repossession, the stunned realization that their comfort had been built on the labor of someone they underestimated. I let the silence fill the spaces that had once been crowded with resentment, anxiety, and unspoken frustration. In that space, I felt a strange relief, a quiet triumph that needed no external validation. I realized then that sometimes justice is not a confrontation, not a fight, not even a heated argument. It is the simple act of stepping away, of letting systems function, of allowing consequence to follow action. It was the purest lesson in fairness I had ever learned, and it had been delivered in the quiet, unassuming way of reality correcting itself. The world had shifted back, and for the first time in weeks I felt grounded, resolute, and unshakably free. The house, my labor, my sacrifice, it had all mattered. Not because it was acknowledged in the heat of argument, not because it could be pleaded for, but because truth has a way of asserting itself, eventually, fully, indisputably, and I had stepped aside to let it do exactly that.